Welcome home. We are WNST. Taos, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively into what is a season that we're going to be talking a lot of football here this week. That is for sure. The Ravens are 0-2. We are taking the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back on the road this week for the second place Orioles. I don't know where to begin. I haven't shaved with either one this week. I'm sort of on a strike until somebody wins, but the Orioles will be playing at home on Friday. Luke and I will be down at Fadley's at Lexington Market. I will have the Ravens scratch offs this week. I have like 3 of these Gold Rush doublers left after our remote last week. We had a great time sitting down and chatting with some old friends, and we did that down at Cooper's in the middle of the Maryland Oyster Tour, Oyster Festival, I should say. We're in the middle of the Maryland Oyster Tour. 26 oysters in 26 days. So far, I'm 11 for 11. They've been really tasty, really different every day. Luke thinks he doesn't like oysters. Yeah, I'll tell you what, the Oyster Tour is going to take a little bit of a respite here this week just to talk some football. I see a lot of things, and I don't know that I could have seen them at 0-2. I don't know what that would have looked like to bet on that up at Hollywood Casino, but what we saw on Sunday, we spent 6-7 months of the offseason, you and I, talking about this. What would happen if the offensive line isn't good enough? And I don't think either one of us could have seen 0-2 coming.
Certainly not. When you look at the first 5 games of the season and you identified the home opener against the Las Vegas Raiders, it's a team that's was 8-9 a year ago, a team that replaced its head coach in the middle of last season. That was a soft spot on the schedule, right? If you're not going to win that game, then all bets are off in terms of any of those games. And not to say that I think the Ravens are going to start 0-5. I don't. I still think this is a good football team, but they, especially over the final 12 minutes on Sunday, they didn't play anywhere close to a good football team. They broke down and had letdowns and melted down in just about any way you can think. Their offense, the offensive line, Derrick Henry with a false start on a 3rd and 1 play, John Harbaugh with a challenge that wasn't good to match the bad challenge in the first half that cost them a timeout that they could have used at the end of each half. The defense, which was so good in the first half, was that bad in the second half, where the Raiders scored on every possession other than their first one in the third quarter. That ended up being a turnover on downs where they could have kicked a field goal. And for good measure, even their special teams, Jordan Stout shanks a punt on the penultimate drive that put the Raiders on a short field and made that go-ahead field goal that much easier. So that was kind of a clinic in how to melt down late in the football game. And we've talked about this at a few different points over the last few years. I saw people making comparisons to the Colts game last year, the Pittsburgh game last year in Pittsburgh, where the Ravens led and kind of inexplicably let that one get away. We talked about it 2 years ago with the Miami game and the Giants game up at the Meadowlands. We've seen this team, for as much as they haven't lost a whole lot overall, They seem to lose in this kind of fashion, but I'm not as concerned about comparing it to the past. In the present, they're 0-2, and they've got to figure out some of these issues. And you just said it. For me, the offensive line, but I'll also throw this out there. And this isn't to deviate from my belief that Zach Orr is going to be a good defensive coordinator in this league, but he's a rookie defensive coordinator in this league. And through 2 games, they've given up 53 points. They've given up more passing yards than anyone in the league through 2 weeks. And Gardner Minshew isn't Patrick Mahomes. So at best, it's been choppy on the defensive side. So
I didn't know that stat. They've given up more passing yards than any team in the league.
They have.
Wow, that's a big number. I hadn't
in the Monday Night Football, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear it that way or feel it that way. That's alarming.
Well, think about it. Gardner Minshew finished with 276 yards. Go look at what the halftime stats were. I think the Raiders had 43 yards total. Now, he had a few more passing yards than that, with considering sacks and what that does to net yardage.
Well, they couldn't run the ball. You knew that. So
right.
they passed exclusively at the end of the game, and successfully exclusively. There wasn't a whole lot of resistance. And the pass rush, look, Van Noy got in, Owe got in, whatever. But when the game's on the line, where are your best players? That's my columnist at this point is you want to brag about Roquan Smith. You want to brag about Kyle Hamilton. You want to brag about Marlon Humphrey. You want to brag about this offense and Zay Flowers and Lamar Jackson and reigning MVP. And we brought in a Hall of Famer. I don't see any push up front that is allowing skill position players to succeed on the offensive side. And the defensive side, big mistakes and big problems and big plays at a time when you have a 10-point lead at home. You got to put them to sleep. They're a bad football team.
Yeah, I mean, Ronnie Stanley said it best in the post-game locker room where guys were really searching for answers. I mean, I think they were shell-shocked, but he flat out said it. We had so many chances to put the final nail in the coffin in that game, and we didn't do it. And that was collective, right? Again, someone make a play in some phase of the game, and instead it was kind of a contest to see who could one up the other phase of the game by making a mistake that was going to keep the Raiders in it and give them an opportunity to tie the game and take the lead the way they ultimately did. So really discouraging in that regard. But, the big picture questions, you start with the offensive line. Their run blocking was horrible in the first half. They got something going. They got some run game going in the second half, but still not consistent. Right. I mean, Derrick Henry busted a couple plays. Great. That was good to see. Finally looked like Derrick Henry. But
well, they had a drive that lets us say, well, they did it once. I mean, certainly going down the field in the end of third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter, like that started to feel like, oh, this is why they brought Derrick Henry. They're going to pound this. My prediction before the game was 30-13. They were up 23-13. It felt like, man, my prediction's pretty good. They'll score another one here. They'll get the ball. They'll take the air out of the ball, and that'll be the end. They'll put them to sleep. I mean, we've seen this so many times. How you win 13 games last year is finishing games like that. A winnable game at home.
I mean, but you've got to go out and do it. And this offensive line, I'm not seeing it collectively. Now, I'll say this. I still have optimism that Roger Rosengarten's going to get better as the year goes on. I think he's eventually going to be the right tackle. I mean, Patrick McCary struggled just as much against Max Crosby, who, by the way, was an absolute game wrecker. I mean, 2 sacks, 5 pressures, but just I saw Brian Baldinger, your good buddy, had a breakdown early Monday morning and just had 2.5 minutes of highlights of Max Crosby just wrecking the game. I mean, even when he didn't make a play that showed up in the box score, he's still wrecking the game. And he was the best player on the field. I mean, he was. So, but this offensive line, Rosengarten at right tackle, I'll totally buy he's going to get better as the year goes on. I'll say the same about Andrew Voorhees, although he certainly struggled at left guard. Faalele at right guard. You've heard me saying this. You've heard me saying this a lot. I'm not an offensive line expert. I'm not an offensive line coach in the NFL. Let me be very clear about that. I'm not seeing it. The guy doesn't move fast enough. It's great to be 380 pounds, right? On paper, that looks like you should be able to maul some people in the run game. He doesn't play like he's 380 pounds in terms of functional game strength, football strength. When he's out there, he's not moving people. He's not mauling people, and he can't move. So I look at this and I say, is he really, truly better than Ben Cleveland? And look, I'm not saying Ben Cleveland's going to come in and be Marshall Yanda. Let's be very clear about that. I don't think this is the coaching staff having such a vendetta that Ben Cleveland's a future Pro Bowler in waiting. But we did see him fill in for Kevin Zeitler for 3 starts between last season and the year before. And in those 3 games, that was better than what we've seen out of Faalele in the first 2 weeks. So I
hear DeCosta's potential, right? Like I watched that press conference from 2 weeks ago. I also waved to him at Pearl Jam over the weekend as well. This thought that we're going to get cheaper. You already said Zeitler. I'll say Moses. We'll talk about last year's offensive line that won 13 games and allowed Lamar to win an MVP. Certainly, I don't know if Lamar bought them gold watches when he won his MVP and got his money for that, but it does happen up front. And we spent 8 months talking about it. And I'll hear as my gray hairs grow in that Zeitler was getting old, Moses was getting old. I'll hear all that. They were expensive. But this would have been better with Keaton Mitchell in the backfield and a real offensive line than giving the ball to a 30-something Hall of Fame running back that has nowhere to go. And
well, this was why back in March, I was lukewarm to the idea of Derrick Henry, not because I didn't like Derrick Henry. It's because of this idea that you're going to replace 3 starters on the offensive line. And I mean, okay, Rosengarten was a second-round pick. He was a late second-round pick.
Well, you don't have a
But
real answer. I mean,
that's my
even when they
thing,
went
right? I
into
mean,
camp at the end of July, they had a bunch of rookies, a bunch of question marks, and Ben Cleveland and Patrick McCary. We've been talking about this for 6 months.
well, and this is why I looked at giving $9 million to a running back and saying, okay. Again, it's not that I think Derrick Henry's too old or that Derrick Henry isn't a fantastic running back, but you saw it last year in Tennessee when the Titans couldn't block. Go look at what Derrick Henry's numbers were. They weren't very impressive. He averaged, I think, 4.2 yards per carry. It's not winning you football games at the end of the day. I mean, that was part of my trepidation here, was the opportunity cost. It wasn't, never ever pay a running back, although that's kind of my philosophy. And by the way, I'm not alone in that. There are a lot of teams out there that don't want to do that.
My God, call 2 swing passes a quarter for him and just give him the ball in space. It's better than handing it off to him. Spread everybody out, throw it over the guard's head, and let him get into space and maybe run over a linebacker or something. I mean, it worked when they tried it, but the play that they called where he moved his foot, where are you aligning? What are you doing? You have the NFL MVP and a Hall of Fame running back, and you're going to play hokey with the football and with the game on the line? It was just – this is the paranoia of John Harbaugh outthinking himself in a lot of cases.
Well, I mean, the tush push has become a big play around the league. I'm not saying I agree with it either, right?
But execute it.
Well, Derrick Henry didn't do much. I mean, okay, he finally busted a couple runs. He did nothing in the first half. They couldn't move anybody. I mean, that's part of the problem. Their offensive line, I mean, we can talk about the pass protection and the concerns there. They're not moving anyone in the run game consistently. I mean, they're just not. So when you're struggling to do that, that's when you tend to think of, we might need to do the brotherly shove or the tush push or whatever you want to call the play that the Eagles have made famous, which, by the way, they haven't run as well, at least in week 1, without Kelsey at center. I mean, you kind of a Hall of Fame center makes that play go. And, you sure as heck aren't going to execute it when you false start on that play. I mean, Derrick Henry doesn't get a pass there. It's a bad penalty. Again, just another example of all the things they did late in that football game to lose. So, but I look at this offensive line, and again, my question was always not that you had to run it back and bring back John Simpson and Kevin Zeitler and Morgan Moses, but when you move on from all 3 and you're talking about relying on young guys and not necessarily, Linderbaum aside, we're not talking about first-round picks here. I mean, even Roger Rosengarten is a late second-round pick. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to be good, but for right now, that's a big question mark, right? I mean, that's not someone – you don't draft guys with pick 60-something and plug them into the starting lineup on the norm in the National Football League. That's just not something that it does happen.
Block Max Crosby too.
Right. It does happen. There are guys who can do that, but that's not the norm. And that's not – to me, that's not a good enough plan A for a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. So, again, that was much more the root of my – not doing cartwheels over the Derrick Henry move. It's not that I didn't like Derrick Henry. It was the opportunity cost and looking at the state of the offensive line. Now, a month from now, maybe they'll have that straightened out. Maybe they'll pivot to Ben Cleveland and he'll give them a higher floor than what Faalele is doing. Maybe Roger Rosengarten will settle in. I expect him to get better. I expect Voorhees to get better, but that doesn't mean they're all going to be good enough over the course of the season. And to the point that you've made that I was much more dismissive about, because I didn't think they're going to lose to the Las Vegas
Hold on,
Raiders
everybody. Stop everything. Listen up. Luke's about to give me credit. Go ahead, Luke.
I'm giving you credit because you continued to point to this early season schedule. Not that I was ignoring it, but you look at them at 0-2. Nestor, these next 3 weeks at Dallas, and I get it, the Cowboys got their feelings hurt by New Orleans, who might be pretty good, actually, the way they play the first 2 weeks. Then you come home against Buffalo, who, to me, the Bills have looked better than I thought they would early in the season, especially considering some of their turnover. Now they're really hurt on defense, but Sunday night game, Josh Allen, enough said, right? 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league facing off. And then you go to Cincinnati in week 5. So, Nestor, there's not even that much of a disastrous scenario in terms of like going out there and laying 3 eggs in a row or anything like that. It's not an impossible scenario to say that they don't play horribly over the next 3 weeks, yet they still find themselves 1-4. I mean, that's in play. I'm not saying that's the most likely
They can
outcome.
play well and be 1-4.
Right. That's my point. So you look at this and you say, look, 0-2, and people are going to start citing all the statistics. Well, the reason why is most 0-2 teams over the course of the history of the league stink, right? So, of course, the percentage of teams that start 0-2 aren't going to make the playoffs, right? That's going to be a high percentage. And I still think this is a good football team at the end of the day. I still think they're going to figure it out to the degree that, this isn't going to go like 2015, for example, which
Well,
is
you
the last
start to
time
think, can they
started.
get to 10 or 11 wins now? Not are they going to get 13 or 14 when you start 0-2?
Sure. Well, and I said it in the aftermath of the Chiefs game, and I think you mostly agreed with me. Nothing about how they looked in Kansas City drastically altered my trajectory as far as what I thought they were going to be in the regular season. But when you lose at home to the Las Vegas Raiders, that does make me take a longer
Well, and
look
the
at it.
Raiders weren't lucky. The Raiders came and beat them. The Raiders had the better players on the field. The Raiders made the plays. The Ravens made the gaffes. It wasn't as lopsided as I thought it was going to be from a talent standpoint. And I think that's the part that should be alarming, is that we brought our best players, they brought their best players. Devontae Adams and, to your point, Max Crosby were the best players on the field. The Ravens didn't have an answer for them when the game was on the line. And you could say, well, Lamar's the best player on the field. By the way, I had dinner with Marvin the other night. I ran into Gardner Minshew in the lobby, and I thought he's bigger than I thought he was going to be, like that's football players, right? But I Gardner Minshew in the lobby of the Marriott on Saturday night, I looked at him and thought, how's that guy beating Lamar? Like roll the ball out. We have Roquan Smith. Roll the ball out. We have Kyle Hamilton. Roll the ball out. We have Derrick Henry. Doesn't work that way when the offensive line can't move. You talk about all your stars you want, but if the offensive line isn't making holes for anybody and isn't protecting the quarterback, you talk about Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews disappearing, Isaiah Likely from last week. You have time to distribute the ball. And we knew that all along, but I don't think they realized what a dumpster fire this offensive line was going to be. I think they realized all along there were questions, but they thought that these guys would answer the bell when it rang, and they haven't. Ronnie Stanley's been, less of a question mark than we haven't talked about him, but he hadn't been awful. I mean, yeah, and he's not hurt. So from that perspective, I give him a point on that. And Linderbaum, I mean, you talk about the weak points of it. The weak points are Max Crosby's just going to go after the 380-pound guy that can't move all game until you go the other way, and then you have to run away from Max Crosby the whole game.
Well, and it's not just Falele, but whichever guy's lining up at right tackle. Your left guard has had his issues. It hasn't been maybe as pronounced, but they're not getting above average play from those positions. I mean, Ronnie Stanley, the penalties aside, has been pretty darn good. Probably as good as you can expect him to be at this stage of his career, given the injury history. Linderbaum has looked like Tyler Linderbaum, but you still have 3/5 of your offensive line that you're looking at this and saying, this isn't championship caliber. Now, does it need to be in week 2? No.
It needs to be good enough to beat the Raiders at home.
Right. As I said to you, going into the season, to me, you wanted the floor to look somewhere in the neighborhood of average at the beginning of the year, and then you have optimism that it can be above average and better as the year goes on. But, at those positions, and specifically at the guard positions, and then whatever you're going to do at right tackle, I mean, yeah, I saw someone say it on social media. I can't remember. It was someone that I follow. It wasn't just a random fan saying this. It was someone who pays attention to the rest of the league, suggested they might have the worst starting guard tandem in the NFL right now. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So it's concerning. It really is. And then when you couple that with whatever that defense was in the second half, and I get it, people were mad about it, some of the penalties. The Matabike face mask call was a phantom call. Yet 2 plays later, Nestor, they still had the Raiders in 2nd and 20, and then they gave up 50 yards through the air on the next 2 plays. I mean, I can't just give the defense a pass on the rest of a drive because of a bad face mask call, especially when you still had them in a bad down and distance 2 plays later. And look, I get it. 3rd and goal from the 17, the end zone play to Devontae Adams. It was a questionable call. It was a borderline call one way or the other. But guess what? Devontae Adams is a multi-time Pro Bowl player, and he sold the heck out of it. That's going to happen. And by the way, Mark Andrews can do that kind of thing, and Zay Flowers will hopefully do that kind of thing. That happens. How about making a stop? Gardner Minshew, to your point, he's not Patrick Mahomes. And whether you're talking about Devontae Adams, forget about Adams. Okay, he's a great player. That Brock Bowers running wide open down the field. And look, he's a first round talent. Anyone who watched him in college can't be shocked by
he's
the
got
fact
some
that he's
Kelsey
making
in
plays.
him, right? He's going to be a good player.
But he's running wide open on a lot of those plays. I mean, they started running some of that. I think one of the big adjustments they made, because, I mean, the first half, Gardner Minshew could not have looked any less interested in holding on to the ball. He wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And it reflected in his halftime numbers. I think he was, 14 of 16 for 64 yards. I mean, he was averaging 4 yards per pass attempt. That's awful. But what they started doing, they started running some of that boot action and getting him moving. And I mean, they were losing Bowers, and Adams made some great contested catches. I mean, he's Devontae Adams. He's still a heck of a player, even if he's not necessarily in his prime anymore. He's still an excellent player. But I mean, a rookie tight end, you can't lose sight of them. I mean, the Raiders, it's no secret who their two big pass catching options are. It's Adams and it's Brock Bowers rapidly emerging. So as well as the defense played in the first half, and they held them to 43 yards. It was 43 yards on, I think, 26 plays. I mean, that's phenomenal. But football is a 60-minute game. And for as well as they played in the first half, they didn't stop them at all, really, in the second half. Even the turnover on downs on that opening, that first drive that the Raiders had in the third quarter, I thought that was some head-scratching play calling after they finally got the big play. They just ran the ball twice, and then they tried to go for it on fourth down. It was bizarre. It was a weird sequence where they netted 0 points. So they didn't make any stops in the second half. So, okay, the defense was great in the first half. Awesome. They were bad in the second half. So what am I supposed to do with that, right? I mean, I can look at the final numbers and say, well, you only gave up this many yards and you only gave up 4.3 yards per play or whatever it was, but wasn't good enough, right? I mean, it wasn't nearly good enough in the second half. So you look at that and then you remember, you don't have Mike Macdonald calling the defense yet. And I'm not trying to take a dig at Zach Orr that he's not going to figure it out and be a good defensive coordinator. We've talked about it. Mike Macdonald, that defense had its hiccups 2 years ago early in the season. So I'm not shocked by that, but you better start overcoming it quickly, because it's not going to get any easier going to Dallas or playing Buffalo or going to Cincinnati in week 5. So, and Nate Wiggins aside, who didn't play a whole lot in week 1 anyway, they're pretty healthy on defense right now. Okay, Arthur Millette, I'll hear that, but they're not your all-pro talents, to your point that, where is Roquan Smith? Where is Kyle Hamilton these first couple games? I mean, I talked about it in week 1 that you're not going to find a game that they're not going to play worse in tandem together than they did in Kansas City. They weren't that bad against the Raiders, those two individually, but they're your two best players on defense. Where are they?
Well, in the first half, they got to push in regard to the passing game, right? Blowing up the running game. They got it. Owe got off. Van Noy, which wins the James McCann Award for me in just showing up and playing. But they had something that they lacked in the third. Well, certainly in the fourth quarter, where I keep wanting to call them Oakland. Stop me, because I did it 100 times on Sunday. Where the Raiders were passing the ball at will and weren't dealing with. I mean, they kind of got winded, don't you think? I mean, whatever happened at the end of the game, it was a different defense in the fourth quarter than the first quarter in how they were playing the pass. And once the Raiders started passing it and they had no success running it, and Minshew was moving around a little bit and making his own space and getting rid of the ball, it really neutralized the defensive pass rush, which I thought at the beginning of the game would be overwhelming. To think that Gardner Minshew was going to throw them back into the game in the fourth quarter, I would have thought that would have been intolerable for this defense.
Yeah, exactly. So, and look, I mean, the pass rush for them, they finished with, they got sacks. I mean, Owe had a great day, but Hanoi had a great day. I mean, it's not as though the pass rush was non-existent by any stretch of the imagination, but you got to cover some people downfield. Like you can't just say, well, we didn't get to the quarterback there. Like, like you've got to cover some people. And like I said, I mean, it's one thing if Devontae Adams is going to make great contested catches, which he's apt to do. And Brandon Stevens found that out on a few occasions. But I mean, again, Brock Bowers is running wide open down the field. Like, what is that? So what's going on with the coverage there? Is there just the spacing on dropping it in the zone from short to intermediate, and your safety's slow to react? I don't know. Again,
well, the breakdown last week,
but
that Humphrey and Hamilton had cost them a touchdown. It just takes one ball to go over your head, right? So the breakdowns were there last week as well in communication and how are we playing this and who's got what responsibility in a defense that's very multiple and still young. Trenton Simpson, there's a lot of guys running around out there that don't have a lot of in-game experience. And it is funny because later in the afternoon, I saw Geno Stone running around on the sidelines with the Bengals. I saw a familiar face. I'm like, oh, that's Geno Stone. You start to see these familiar, watch the Chargers play, you see all of them. You see half of our former team when you see the Chargers play. But this is a new group of personnel on the backside and communicating back there. I did see one point where Marcus was running around back there making some plays as well and shadowing Devontae Adams in the end zone and keeping a play from becoming a touchdown. But in the general sense, the back end of the secondary, I haven't seen enough of it. And certainly the last 2 weeks, Mahomes is one thing. Mahomes and Kelsey, I'll hear that all day. But this was certainly – you knew who you had to stop. You looked at 17 and said, we have to stop him. We have to stop 89, the big tight end. They couldn't do it at the end of the game.
Well, and I'll disagree with a little bit of what you said in terms of, I mean, the secondary is supposed to be the strength, right? I mean, okay, I get it. Geno Stone's not there. They brought in Eddie Jackson. He's a former Pro Bowl safety as your number 3 safety, but Marlon Humphrey has got plenty of experience. Brandon Stevens started all last year. Kyle Hamilton's an all-pro. Marcus Williams, when he's been healthy, and that's been an issue the last couple of years, but he's played at a high level. So you have
Brandon Stevens looks like a liability right now.
I mean, he did on Sunday. I mean, that he struggled. There's no doubt about it. But really, Trenton Simpson is the only new major piece. And, I'm not going to put it all on him. I mean, you've got all pros back there. You've got former Pro Bowl players back there. You got to make plays. They didn't make a play in the second half defensively. And that's why I said, I'll hear the Matabike phantom face mask call. I agree. It shouldn't have been called, but they had him in 2nd and 20 2 plays later. I mean, what? A blown call and then the defense just gets completely exonerated? No, that's not how this works. And again, I'll hear the 50-50 questionable nature of the PI in the end zone on 3rd and goal from the 17. But how about making a stop before you even get to that point? Again, to your point, Gardner Minshew's not Patrick Mahomes. So at some point in time, you need to make a play. That's why I said over the final 12 minutes, I mean, just a collective breakdown, offensive line and the Derrick Henry false start on 3rd and 1 and the sack on the first down where the Ravens go 3 and out and the Raiders get the ball right back with a tie game, and the defense and Jordan Stout shanking a punt and John Harbaugh wasting another challenge and a timeout that would have been really helpful at the end of the game. I mean, you just go down the list. I mean, how about this was before the final 12 minutes, but I'll make mention of this. I think the moment that really foreshadowed what was going to happen was actually the Lamar interception intended for Bateman, thrown in the tight coverage. Bateman bobbled it. Was it a good defensive play? Was it a bad throw? Was it a drop?
He didn't battle for the ball either. He didn't. I mean, it just wasn't a good clean and pull it in.
I mean, either way, it wasn't a good play, right? And that was the play to me. When you saw how the second half began, the Ravens come out, great drive to open the second half. I mean, very complete. They got it going, run and pass, score a touchdown, 16-6. The Raiders move the ball, but they get the turnover on downs, right? So it's 16-6 and they have the ball, and it feels like Oakland, I just did what you said.
Nice.
Las Vegas, it felt like that might be the moment where you say, all right, is this going to kind of be like the Texans playoff game last year, which remember, that was a close game in the first half, and the Ravens took control, and it ended up, they ran away with it, right? I mean, it ended up being a blowout in the second half. But instead, Lamar throws that pick. Again, whose fault is it? In the eye of the beholder. Either way, it wasn't a good enough play from the Ravens side. And the Raiders score a touchdown then, and it's game on after that, right? So even though they did rebuild a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, that moment midway through the third quarter, yeah, that kind of felt like that was the game was teetering on maybe the Ravens really, really seizing control of that one. And instead they gave them the ball in a short field, and the Raiders scored their first touchdown of the day. So I think that was the foreshadowing to what we ended up seeing over the final 12 minutes. And I mean, the final 12 minutes, like I said, that was a master class in self-destruction. I mean, penalties, special teams, coaching, offense, defense, none of it was good enough. I mean, it just wasn't. No one made a play. They needed someone to make a play in the way that
even a good punt, for crying out loud, would have saved their ass.
It would have given them a chance, right? I mean, that punt gave the Raiders the ball in Ravens territory. I mean, they didn't even have to go that far, right? So, I mean, it just wasn't good enough.
Well, they also had a kicker. They had the better kicker. Matter of fact, let's break, because I want to come back and just pick the whole last 12 minutes up, because Luke Jones is here. Friday, we're going to be at Fadley's. The following Friday, we're going to be at Costas on the 27th. It is the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. It's all presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I do have my Liberty Pure shirt on. I have my bottle of water here, 1-800-CLEAN Water. They are putting us out on the road, along with our friends at Curio Wellness, for 26 oysters in 26 days. I'm about 10 days into this. I just had the most creative oysters, the most delicious. I'm so pleased with myself in doing this tour, because the crab cake tour was like, oh, you're going to eat a crab cake every day. I said they're going to taste different. They're all going to be different. My former partner, Ray Bachman, pointed that out last week down in Riva, Maryland at Mike's. And if anybody knows about Ray Bachman, I'm going to be sharing a lot of information. We're working on some things to help Ray. So if anybody out there knows Ray, if you don't know about Ray, please see the internet. Ray's battling cancer, and we're going to be Ray strong around here and supporting him. So, but Liberty Pure Solutions, 800 Clean Water, they sent me out to this oyster tour, so I get to eat oysters with my buddies like Ray down in dragging my ass to Riva, Maryland, down in Annapolis at Mike's. What a great place that was. The videos are coming up. It'll all be out at the front of Baltimore Positive. We're doing it all for the Oyster Recovery Partnership in learning about how all this works. We had the Oyster Festival over the weekend. By the way, shout out to Patrick Russell at Cooper's. They sold 26,000. They shucked 26,000 oysters down on the square on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Fells Point. We broadcast from Cooper's. Had a great show. Dave Sheinin from the Washington Post came down. He hung out. And I had a very interesting guest for you, Luke. Chad Wiesling, local NFL agent who represents Josh Jacobs, which is most of the Packers offense at this point, sat in with us on Friday. So great football conversations. Crab Cake Tour converging with the Oyster Tour. It's happening all week. We're doing our show on the 26th from the B&O Railroad Museum for the Oyster Recovery Partnership. We're going to learn about oysters, talk to oyster farmers, and I'm going to eat the hell out of it. By the time I get to the end of the month, I'm going to start eating a dozen a day. I've been trying to low-key it here and just stick with 4 or 5 or 6 a day here. But it's a great month. It's September. The Orioles were in a pennant race. The Ravens were supposed to be 4-0 this month. It never works out the way it's planned, which is why Luke and I get together and we discuss it. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We have plenty, and I mean plenty, of football, baseball. We got a lot of things. I don't know if we have any solutions, but we certainly have some conversations on the Orioles and the Ravens that we're going to be getting to here right after this on Baltimore Positive.